أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وعنده مفاتح الغيب لا يعلمها إلا هو ويعلم ما في البر والبحر وما تسقط من ورقة إلا يعلمها ولا حبة في ظلمات الأرض ولا رطب ولا يابس إلا في كتاب مبين. So this is a new lecture series, inshallah. We're going to talk about the signs of the end of time. And this lecture will be, as is my custom, will largely be an introductory lecture. And I want to begin by placing, or reminding rather, ourselves of a few things that we already believe, but we want to recall them because it will make sense in light of the subject matter. The first is that one of the cornerstones of our belief is that we believe in the finality of the Prophet's message, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when we say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, implied in that is that we believe that there is no Prophet after Sayyidina Muhammad alaihi wasallam. And therefore we call him Khatam al-Nabiyyin. He is the seal, the end of this prophetic line beginning with Adam alayhi salam. And we believe that all of the prophets alayhi salam is one of the articles of our faith. But we also believe that there is no revelation after the revelation of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And history has attested to that. There is no faith that has emerged out of nothing since the advent of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And we know that, but the reason I repeat it in light of what we're going to talk about is that the function, therefore, one of the functions of the Prophet ﷺ is to inform us, in some cases we will see throughout these lectures in very great detail, to inform us what will happen with the end of this thing that we call human life. How will things end, and how will the end of this life therefore lead to life in the hereafter, which is part of our belief as well, and the belief of all other or many of the other great religions. But the Prophet ﷺ has come as a mubashir, to come to give us glad tidings, saying if you do what Allah has asked, if you keep the Sharia, if you follow the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, if you do these things, inshallah things will be good in the hereafter. So that he has come to give us glad tidings, but he has also come as a nadhir. He has also come as a warner, to warn us how things will unravel, how things will get unhinged, and how things ultimately will end, how this world will end and it will fold into the hereafter. This is also part of our faith. To begin the conversation, we will go back and revisit the hadith of Gabriel alayhi salam that we use time and time again as a teaching tool. We won't go through the whole hadith, but the famous hadith in which Gabriel comes to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Sahaba said that this man came, he had jet black hair, he had white clothes, he didn't look like he traveled, but none of us knew who he was. He came to the Prophet ﷺ and he put his knees at the Prophet's knees, and then he put his hands on his thighs, and he said, Ya Muhammad, akhbirni an al-Islam. He said, Ya Muhammad, tell me about Islam. And then the Prophet ﷺ said that Islam is that you testify that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is the Prophet or the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. You pray 5 times a day, you fast the month of Ramadan, you pay your zakat, and you go to Hajj once in your life if you are able to. And we discussed that those areas, those 5 things that the Prophet ﷺ answered Islam, these developed into the Sharia sciences, plural. So those are all actions. All of those things that the Prophet ﷺ described explain for us what are the things we are supposed to do. So if you ask yourself, what does God want me to do here? What does God want me to do there? The answer is going to come from the Sharia sciences. And then Gabriel asked the Prophet ﷺ about Iman, about faith. And then the Prophet ﷺ gives the 6 articles of faith that we believe in Allah, we believe in the revealed books, we believe in the angels and the prophets, that we believe in destiny, it's good and it's bad, and we believe in the final hour. And all of those answers to the question of Iman, from that develop our theological sciences. Ilm al-Kalam, Aqidah, Usul al-Din has different names, but emerged from that an entire body of sciences. But in that, the Prophet ﷺ said the final hour. So part of our theology, part of what we believe in, is that there is a day of judgment. And then therefore, there is a march towards the day of judgment, and there are certain things that will happen in this world that will lead us to that. And in the day of judgment, there are a series of events that will happen that will lead, inshallah, to paradise, or unfortunately for some, to the hellfire. May Allah protect us. But then Gabriel asked the Prophet ﷺ about spiritual excellence and ihsan. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, you worship Allah as if you see Him, and if you do not, know that He sees you. And we talked extensively about how from this came our spiritual discipline, the discipline of tasawwuf, of tazkiyah. And then Gabriel asked the Prophet ﷺ, tell me when the hour is. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, which is very important, the one asking knows no more than the one being asked. So Gabriel said, tell me about its signs. Tell me about its signs. And then he said that you will see the slave girl will give birth to her mistress. And that you will see the barren, barefoot people vying to build tall buildings. And then Gabriel left, and then Gabriel turns to Sayyidina Umar and he said, do you know who that was? And Umar radiallahu anhu says, Allah and His Prophet know best. And he said, this was Gabriel, he came to teach you your religion. So when the Prophet ﷺ says that, جَاءَ يُعَلِّمُكُمْ أَمْرَ دِينِكُمْ, he came to teach you your religion, that means everything that, all of those things that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, all of that equals Islam. Islam with a capital I, our religion. Our religion is our Sharia, our religion is our belief system, our religion is our spiritual tazkiyah system, and it's also part and parcel of our religion, equally with all of the others, the signs of the end of time, or the signs of the final hour. So it is to that last part of the hadith that we've dedicated these lectures to unpack what that means. Now, when Gabriel asks the Prophet ﷺ when the hour is going to be, the Prophet ﷺ said, no one knows that. You don't know that, and I don't know that. So this is from the ghaibiyat. This is from the things that Allah has not given knowledge to the Prophet ﷺ about. There is nothing that the Prophet ﷺ had and knew except that He gave it to us. That's part of our belief in His prophethood. Is that He didn't hide something or forget to tell us something or made a mistake. Of course, not everything He gave us was complete. So He said, I don't know that. But I can tell you about some of the signs that will tell you as we draw near. And the reason that's important is that this is not the first item in our faith that we don't have knowledge of. Allah Ta'ala hides certain things. So for example, Allah Ta'ala hides Laylatul Qadr in the days of Ramadan, in the evenings of Ramadan. We don't know exactly with certainty that this is the day of Laylatul Qadr. We customarily finish the Quran on the 27th, and that's when we make sure we fundraise and all that kind of stuff, but we don't know if that's Laylatul Qadr. We think it's our best guess, but we want to be on our best behavior all of the nights of Ramadan. Allah Ta'ala has hidden His supreme name. The name, if we use that name, Allah Ta'ala will answer the dua. Allah has hidden that name in all of the rest of Allah's names, so that we remember and invoke Allah Ta'ala with all of His names. If we knew that name, we would forget all of the other names and only focus on that. If we knew when Laylatul Qadr was, we would only focus on that one day and forget all the other days. We might not even fast all of Ramadan. If we knew when Laylatul Qadr was, we said, oh, I know what it is, I just got to show up on that one day. Allah Ta'ala has hidden al-Saba al-Mathani in the Quran. We don't know exactly what are the Saba al-Mathani. Is it these 7 surahs? Is it Surah Al-Fatiha? Different interpretations of the ulama. But Allah has hidden it so that we seek it out in the Quran. Allah Ta'ala has hidden our accepted deeds amongst all of our deeds. We do not know which of our deeds Allah Ta'ala will accept. So therefore, we do our best to worship Allah and to offer as many good deeds as we can. On the day of Friday, Allah has given us a moment, an hour, a moment in which the dua is accepted, but Allah has hidden that hour so that on Friday we are on our best behavior from the time the Fajr comes in until Maghrib so that we can capture that moment, that hour of accepted dua. so on and so forth. Allah has hidden the saint amongst the population. We do not know who amongst us is the saint, truly, except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, when the Prophet ﷺ tells Gabriel that we don't know when the hour is, it's hidden, that's a reminder for us that when something is hidden, we need to pay attention to the greater concept. So, one of the tendencies that people have when they talk about the signs of the end of time is, well, there's a lot of things that can happen, but if we can, stereotype and summarize, is that some people, they lose it, and they think it's the end of the world, and they want to just sort of retreat from life. I'm going to go to the hills and live in a bunker, and that's it. That's a kind of one extreme, and I'm over-dramatizing. Another extreme is people want to just deny all of this stuff and say, oh, this is nonsense. This is why I didn't like religion growing up in the first place, because this is all nonsense. So on and so forth. But when the Prophet ﷺ says, we don't know when it's going to be, but I'll tell you some of its signs. Remember, these are signs. In other words, they just indicate the nearness of the final event. So while it's important that we know it, what's more important is how we deal with all of these things. So I also want to spend an equal amount of time throughout the lectures talking about that. Because we don't want these extremes. The Prophet ﷺ warned us against extremism. He warned us against extremism in religion. He said, if you take the religion extremely, it will overpower you and you will lose it. As we see with extremists of different stripes. So we neither need to go to the hills, nor should we deny the things that we will talk about, because all of these come from the Quran and Sunnah, just like the rest of our faith. But our job is to understand them, what's literal, what's a reference, so on and so forth, and answer the question at every moment, so what? What do we do with this information? That's key. What do we do with this information? And by hiding the exact moment of the hour, the Prophet ﷺ is reminding us that we should seek out good throughout all of our time. And I'll get to time in a moment. Now, why do we have this as part of our religion? What is so important about learning about the signs of the end of time, other than the sort of very brief introductory remarks that I just made? The most important is that this subject matter proves the veracity of the Prophet's message, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As we will come to see, there are different types of signs. There are smaller signs, medium signs, large signs, etc. And a lot of these things that we're going to talk about have already happened. But they happened after the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So some of these signs, for example, they happened during the life of the companions, and they all ended with the last generation or the last few people of the generation of the companions. So the companions, when they're living their life after the passing of the Prophet ﷺ, and they see all these things happening that he told them about, their faith is only increased. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ said, he said, كَيْفَ تَكْفُرُونَ وَأَنَا فِيكُمْ? How can you disbelieve that I am amongst you? What more do you want to see? The tree stump cries, and I hug it, and it stops crying. The stones say tasbih in my hands. The water increases in my fingers. The Muslims were outnumbered from the very beginning all the way to the end of the Prophet's life, and they kept winning and winning and winning, and Allah protected them. So the Prophet ﷺ said, what else do you need to see? How can you disbelieve that I am amongst you? And then after the passing of the Prophet ﷺ, he sees all of these things, the Sahaba see all of these things happen, so they say, Subhanallah, Sadaqa Rasulullah ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ was honest and trustworthy. And likewise for us, we will come to see that there are things that happen way after the life of the Prophet, several hundred years after the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And we'll even talk about things that have happened in the last 100 years that the Prophet ﷺ has made reference to. So all of this stuff gives us that extra boost of faith. That yes, this is real. This is not a joke. This is real. The Prophet ﷺ told us about this, and it's happened. And sometimes in unbelievable detail. Sometimes, maybe there is a little bit of ijtihad, to make the bridge of understanding. But at the end of the day, it proves the veracity of the Prophet ﷺ. And it gives us that extra faith. Just like we have faith in the Quran, the way it was collected, just like we have faith in the Sunnah, the way it was collected. Likewise, this gives us more faith. And by the way, this is like a little genre of writing called Dala'il al-Nubuwwah, the proofs of prophethood. So many of the ulama wrote books proving why the Prophet ﷺ was really a prophet and true, etc. So this is one of those items that they add to that he talked about al-ghaybiyat. He talked about things that the Sahaba had no way of knowing. No way of knowing. Like when you hear in the hadith, the Dajjal will come and he will enter every house. Now, if you're a pre-modern Muslim, you must wonder, what does that mean? If you're pre-modern and you have this hadith that we've inherited, what does this mean that the Dajjal is going to come into every house? How is that even possible? I'll just close the door. But now, we have Wi-Fi and we know what that means. We know how many devices now, we think about how many devices now in one house are connected to the Wi-Fi. We want to know who's draining it, right? So we can get them to shut it off so we can move on with our life. So we know now, without a shadow of a doubt, what it means that something or a message or a person can enter into every house. But imagine the Muslims carrying this hadith for 1,000 years, believing in it. Now we'll find out. He said it, but we know he's honest. He's never lied to us. He's never failed us. So on and so forth. So this is an important sort of aspect to the signs of the final hour. Where do we get this information from? Like everything we get from the Quran and the Sunnah. But there are all of the major hadith collections, Bukhari, Muslim, etc. They all have sections that talk about fitan, tribulations, trials and tribulations, signs of the final hour. There are ulama like Ibn Hamad, Ibn Kathir that wrote individual books about or sections of long histories about the final hour. So the ulama did dedicate, not a lot, but they did dedicate writings to articulating what these different things are. One of the extremes that I mentioned, we mentioned the guy that goes to the bunker. We'll get to him. Let's talk a little bit about the person that just rejects all this stuff. Because there's a tendency with modern Muslims to reject everything except the material. So reject belief in miracles, reject belief in the angels, because you can't believe in these things and be in like fine society. It doesn't mix. You can't go around with your neighbors and did you feel there was a jinn in your house last night? I mean, that's not going to work, right? So there's this tendency that we don't want to believe in these things. Allah Ta'ala tells us in the Quran, وَمَا أَتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا. Quran 59:7. Everything that the Prophet ﷺ has given us, we take, and everything he told us not to or to stay away from, we stay away from. So this is one of the major things that he told us about. So for us, this is just like prayer, fasting. It's no big deal. I don't want us to get stressed out about what we're going to talk about. I know there's a mysterious, what is he going to talk about? Signs of the final hour. Just calm down. We're going to find out that 9/10 of this stuff has already happened. So we're already in the, we're like in the, it's like fourth and like, 1 yard. We're like at the end zone almost. It's almost over. So don't worry about it. But the person that rejects this stuff, it's an issue of faith, because in our theology, we refer to these things. Theology in Islam there are 3 chapters of theology. There's one chapter that deals with stuff related to Allah called ilahiyat, matters related to the divine. What are Allah's names? What are His traits? What is impossible for Allah? Things like that. And then there are things related to the prophets, plural, alayhim salam, called an-nubuwwat. And then the 3rd chapter are things called al-sam'iyat, literally things that we hear. Meaning these are the things that we heard the Prophet ﷺ tell us that we might have not seen, but we believe in only because he told us about it. In the study of religion, we call this stuff eschatology, the stuff that happens sort of after we die. What happens, after we die in the hereafter. The Muslims add to that, well, we have that, but we got to take a couple steps before that and remember that there are signs that will tell us that all of this will come to an end. And then we can talk about when we're resurrected, when there's the hisab, when there's the hash, etc., etc. We're not going to talk about that stuff. This series is only about the signs of the final hour. We can talk about that stuff maybe later, but for right now, I just want to talk about the signs of the final hour. So the person that rejects these things needs to understand, and I'm not trying to convince, the purpose of this is not to convince somebody. I want to mention it because we might have doubts ourselves or something like that. Is that when we see these signs play out through history, our job is to say, SubhanAllah. That's about it. And carry on. Move on. Because the Prophet ﷺ, he said, if the hour is about to come, meaning that the final hour is coming, and in your hand is a seed, plant that seed. Now imagine that hadith, that the game is over. All of these major signs have happened. You know that everything is going to end. You know it's a matter of moments and you will be resurrected to be judged, etc., etc. But still, the Prophet ﷺ said, if you have a seed in your hand, plant it. Because that is the right thing to do. So all of us, we have to live the best version of our life. That will never change, even if we're sort of at the end. But, as I said, and we'll just keep repeating, when we see these things, we can't help but say, SubhanAllah. Sadaqa Rasulullah. The Prophet ﷺ was right. And if I had any doubt, I'm embarrassed that I had any doubt, because he was right. The Mashaykh were right. The people before us were right. The generation before us were right. Radiallahu anhu. There have been those in the Muslim community themselves that have denied some of these things. Like Ibn Khaldun is a famous example. So Ibn Khaldun, he criticizes the hadith that deal with the Mahdi, for example. That's one of the major signs. We'll get to that a little bit later. He made a mistake. Ibn Khaldun is a historian. Ibn Khaldun is a sociologist. He's not a hadith scholar. So the hadith scholars responded to him and said, no, the hadith, it's not only are you wrong, but the hadith about the Mahdi are mutawatir. They are the most rigorously authenticated, the highest level of verification that we have in our science of verification. It's not just that they're sahih, they're mutawatir. There are so many hadith about the Mahdi, just like there are so many hadith about the return of Christ alayhi salam. So perhaps the reason we have this, not a big tendency, but the reason there are some people that reject or some people that don't like this subject is because maybe there are some people in the past, even from within the scholarly community, that talk negatively about these things. But those things got sorted out. The next thing I want to say, we mentioned a little while ago about time, and that's something I also want to explain. Allah Ta'ala, He says in chapter 70, verse 4, تعرج الملائكة والروح إليه في يوم كان مقداره 50,000 سنة. That the souls and the angels return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but a day with Allah is like 50,000 years of our years. Now, if you took that ratio, and let's just do this is very simple math, it's not like exact. If you took the 50,000 years and you divided it by the 24 hours of the day, that means that one of our hours is a little over 2,000 years with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the minutes on that same math is that each minute of our minutes is equal to 33, 34 years with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So based on that, if you lived 100 years of our time, when we go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it will be like 3 minutes. Which is why in the Quran, when Allah says, كَمْ لَبِثْتُمْ, how long did you live? We will say, يَوْم, a whole day. But wait a minute, أَوْ بَعْدَ الْيَوْم, or is it part of a day? Because we will see that time is different. So even though we get stressed and emotional and go through all of these things in this life, remember that at the end of the day, we're talking about 3 minutes. Our life will be 3 minutes, and that's if you lived 100 years. Now, if we're not going to live 100 years, most of us, and the first 10, 15 years really don't count because we don't remember them. So it's like 2 minutes. This whole thing that we call life is going to be 2 minutes. Compared to what we will experience, what we will face when we face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So never forget the relativity of that time. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ, he said, بُعِثْتُ أَنَا وَسَاعَتِكَ هَاتَيْنِ بُعِثْتُ أَنَا وَسَاعَتَكَ هَاتَيْنِ I was sent and the hour like this. Meaning me and then the hour is right away is going to be the final hour. This is why he is the last of the prophets, the seal of the prophets alayhi salam. So he came to remind us, like, hey guys, it's almost over. And in the hadith of the Dajjal, for example, when we talk about it, the Prophet ﷺ would say, look, if the Dajjal comes when I'm around, I'll deal with him. But if I'm not around, then do this, and do this. So therefore, there was even the idea at the time of the Prophet ﷺ that this might even happen right away. So just the fact that 1,400 years plus have transpired, don't think that that's a lot of time. That's less than a minute. That's a few minutes, I mean, rather, compared to what we are talking about. So these things have transpired, continue to transpire, will transpire, and therefore, if we can keep that idea of time and the relativity of that front and central, we'll be able to understand why this is important and what we should do. Lastly, I want to talk a little bit about some of the Prophet's advice, ﷺ, in general, dealing with this stuff. And then I want to just lay out a scheme that will help us understand what we're going to talk about. The Prophet ﷺ warned us from getting involved in any fitna, in any trials and tribulations, warned us against bloodshed, warned us about the price, the moral price of a human life, and told us always to stay away from any type of tribulation, confusion, controversy, etc. A lot of the things that we're going to talk about really are social issues that emerge. A lot of these signs are social issues. And if you know about them, and you identify them when they occur in your own life, then therefore you will know what to avoid. That's the Prophet's advice. So it's like the Prophet saying, by the way, this is going to happen. And when this happens, just hang back. And it's as simple as that. Hang back, live your good life. Don't get involved. Don't get politically involved. The Prophet said that. One of the signs that we're going to talk about is the loss of the Khilafah. We've had a Khalifa all the way up until the 1920s. So that was unthinkable that we would lose the Khalifa. I mean, there was always somebody called the Khalifa somewhere. Might have not been perfect, might have not been Quraysh, all of those, but there was somebody called the Khalifa. The Prophet ﷺ told us when you lose the Khalifa, stay away from all those groups. He did not tell us to get politically involved and try to establish the Khilafah. He did not tell us to get politically involved and form a Muslim organization and bring back this and bring back that. He said, in our language, he said, hang back. Ilzam baytak. Stay at home. Meaning literally hang back. Not stay at home like lock yourself up in the hills. Meaning stay at home, don't get involved. Don't worry about getting woke. You don't have to do that. Because this is a sign. And that's why we need to learn these things. What happens, just using this as an example, this is a little bit of a foreshadow, but what happens if we don't take the Prophet's advice, and we get politically involved, as many people in our faith community have in the last, 100 years? We get played with. We get played with because when you play the political game after the loss of significant power, you are going to be a pawn in someone else's political game who has more power than you do. So when I see that situation, and yeah, at the time it was a trauma. One of the Muslim scholars, Dr. Mona Hassan, who was, she also went to Princeton and she did her doctorate work on the loss of the Khilafah. And her book is also published on this subject. She talks about the trauma in the Muslim world from the loss of the Khilafah. It was a traumatic event, without doubt. But the Prophet ﷺ did not leave us anything except that he told us how to deal with it. All we had to do was hang back. If you you can read, David Fromkin has a great book called A Peace to End All Peace, The Collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the Rise of the Modern Middle East. You can see what happens in that book if you don't hang back. The mess that you could create politically when you don't hang back. But since the 1920s up until now, we have all of these groups. In the name of Islam, they try to form these political movements, these Islamist political movements, and they create a mess. They create a mess, and they prevent people, average Muslims, from living their good life. And this is exactly what the Prophet ﷺ told us not to do. He said, when you don't have the Imam, when you don't have the Khalifa, hang back. In one hadith narrated by Ahmad, he said, Al-Harab, Al-Harab, run away from those groups. Run away from those groups that are trying to bring back this political type of Islam. Okay, so that's important that we remember the Prophet's advice. Everything in Islam is super easy and super simple. All we have to do is hang back. Stay away from fitna. The other part of the prophetic advice is that the Prophet ﷺ, he said in a hadith, Man mata qamat sa'atu. Man mata qamat qiyamatu. Whoever has died, their qiyamah has started. So even though we're going to talk about the signs of the end of time, like time with a capital T, when each one of us dies, whenever that is, that's our end game. Again, plant your seed, live your good life. Worry about yourself and those that are around you. Ibda binafsika thumma biman ta'ul. Help yourself and then help those next to you. Kullukum ra'in wa kullukum mas'ulun an ra'ayati. All of you are shepherds and all of you are responsible for your flocks. It's very simple advice. Yeah, some of these things are going to be these big grand signs and these big conflicts and wars and the Crusades and the Mongol invasion and the collapse of the Khilafah, all of these mighty things, but they're signs for us to remember. Subhanallah, Sadaqa Rasulullah. The Prophet was true. He was honest. All I got to do is hang back and live my good life and do the good that I can do with what I've been given. So that's just general advice. We'll get into the specifics later. The last thing is I want to talk a little bit about the scheme of how we're going to talk about this. The first thing is that there are three groups of signs of the end of time. There are the small signs, there are the medium signs, and there are the major signs. All the small signs happened in the first 100 years of Islam. They were the signs that happened as witnessed by the companions, radiallahu anhu, as I alluded to. Next lecture we'll talk about those. The medium signs are all of the things that happened pretty much after that and continued up until like the 13th Islamic century or the beginning of the 20th century. A lot of those things, and there's about, the ulama, they counted those type of what they're called the middle signs, are about 70, 75, and they're sort of in two camps. The majority of them are moral corruption. So the Prophet ﷺ said, people will drink alcohol and people will lie and there'll be a lot of riba and just sort of widespread moral corruption. That stuff is obviously bad, but we can understand that. The other stuff are like just signs. And I want us to remember in the hadith of Gabriel that we began with, when the Prophet ﷺ said that people will compete in building tall buildings. The ulama, like Imam al-Nawawi, for example, he understood that not all of the signs are necessarily bad things. They are just signs. Like the Prophet ﷺ says, when this happens, then know that this is a sign that the hour is near. Not that it's haram to build, tall buildings, for example. And that's where other people, more conservative Muslims get tripped up. So, for example, music. I've talked about music before. I have an episode on the podcast about that. And this is one of the things that I mentioned, that some of the people that say that music is haram is because they say, it's a sign of the final hour. But Imam al-Nawawi and others, they said, just because it's a sign of the final hour doesn't mean that itself is bad. Riba being popular, that's bad. Drinking alcohol, that's haram. But building tall buildings, there's nothing wrong with that. Morally, it's just a sign. So that's something that we also have to keep in mind, particularly when we talk about the middle signs. And then lastly, there are the major signs, and those are the ones that probably everyone wants to talk about. The Mahdi, the Dajjal, Christ coming back, Ya'juj and Ma'juj, all that juicy stuff. We'll get to that stuff, inshallah. But we gotta pace ourselves before we get there, so when we get there, we don't lose it. The major signs themselves, just to be a little bit more complicated, they have their own demarcation of like beginning, middle, and end. The beginning, we're going to talk about. The middle, that's easy to talk about. The end is a little bit difficult to talk about because we don't necessarily know the order of them. Things like the Mahdi, Christ, the Mahdi, Dajjal, Christ, Ya'juj and Ma'juj, we know that order because of the way they are referenced in the hadith. But after that, we don't know the order with definitive proof. It's all ijtihad. So that's the table of contents. A couple of reminders that we've received from our teachers, adding to the prophetic advice as we begin this discussion on the signs of the end time. And with this, we'll close inshallah. Number one is that it is haram for us to wait and anticipate these signs and the final hour. So our job is not to sit in the mosque and wait for them to happen. Our job is to live our good life. Our job is to worship Allah, is to make tazkiyah of ourselves, is to build the world, even if it's the last moment, even if you're the last man, last woman standing, and you have that seed, to plant that seed. That's always our job. For us, all we need to know is when the sign happens, subhanallah, sadaqa Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and live my good life and influence the people around me. The people that sit and anticipate, what they end up doing is they end up doing the second thing that our mashayikh warned us about, which was to almost reenact what's going to happen and sort of force it to come. And that's why throughout Islamic history we have all these people that claim that they were the Mahdi. Because they didn't follow this advice. They're like, oh, look at all these signs are happening. My name is Muhammad. My father's name is Abdullah. I'm from the family of the Prophet. I'm the Mahdi. And there have been many, hundreds of claims of the Mahdi throughout Islamic history. That's also, obviously haram. And what ISIS is doing, what Daesh is doing, is a version of that. They read in some hadith, there's this hadith about a black flag. Oh, we're going to get the black flags. We're going to bring you can't bring the sign. Whatever we do, Allah's not going to follow us. Allah's going to make the sign happen when Allah wants the sign to happen. Our job is to learn the stuff and say, subhanallah, sadaqa Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and live our good life. Neither do we sit and wait and anticipate. Neither do we recreate or reenact or try to bring it about, because this is when people make false claims, and this is when a lot of fitna has happened. Just like the political Islamic people that want to bring back the Khilafah or some kind of quote-unquote ideal Islamic political rule, whatever that means, that's another version of that. You can't bring back what was lost if the Prophet ﷺ told you to leave it alone and hang back. So it's important that we remember these two things. I'll close with that. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam. Any questions? I know you were expecting to talk about the Messiah and all of that. You're going to have to wait.
So what's your take on the Messiah Netflix?
Were you here last time? There was that Denzel Washington movie, Man on Fire? So the guy that wrote that novel, A.J. Quinnell or something like that, he also wrote a novel in 1984 called The Mahdi. And in that novel, so the Netflix series is eerily similar to the plot line. Even though I don't know if there's going to be another season, but none of you read the book anyway. But what ends up happening is the guy in the book that's the Mahdi turns out that he's the son of the head of the British intelligence. And he was planted in Medina when he was young so he could grow up as an Arab and speak Arabic fluently like that. So he could claim that he's the Mahdi and that he would therefore control all the oil and all of the Muslims, this way. And one of the interesting things in the book is that the Mahdi never mentioned any Sunnah. It was all Quran, and never prayed. Just like the guy in the movie, in the Netflix series, when the CIA lady's interrogating him, she says, "Why don't you pray? We had you, under surveillance for 2 days. We didn't see you. Muslims pray 5 times a day." He says something like swab or something like that. So I mean, I find that very eerie. The similarities are too glaring. But that's like what the Dajjal would be like. That's not what the Mahdi would be like. The Mahdi, as we will see, is an actual guy. He's like a good guy. He's like from the ulama. We'll read about him. But the Dajjal is a little bit like he's a trickster. And the Prophet ﷺ said, just hang back. Don't go to it. Like when the Dajjal has an event, don't go see the event. I'm going to prove the Dajjal wrong. You're not going to prove the Dajjal wrong. The Dajjal was placed on earth by Allah for this reason. What do? Hang back. 9/10 of success is just hanging back. So I think the series is important because I think it's important to see how Muslims can be manipulated. Because we have this tendency to want to read into these events things, and I believe that there are many amongst us that could easily be tricked, by these type of claims. So I think it's worth seeing for that reason. But that's just my opinion. Yeah.
I have a question. So you said about when the Caliphate ended, with the Ottoman Empire, but we should try to recreate it. But so often people talk about trying to create a government that follows Islamic principles. And is there a fine line walk between the two? Or do you,
Yeah, sure. As a matter of fact, the Muslims tried to bring back the Khilafah. In 1925, there was a conference in Egypt called the Khilafah Conference, and there was one after that in New Delhi, or the one in New Delhi was first, I can't remember. And the obvious happened is that each Muslim leader wanted to be the new Khalifa. So that's why it never worked, because everyone's like, oh, I'll be the Khalifa now. So that's different than having a government run using Islamic principles. That's an ongoing obligation that Muslim majority countries have. So through constitution and legal codification, that's the way that Muslim majority countries comply with the Sharia today. It's through certain claims of the constitution that Islam is the official religion of the state, that the Sharia is one of the sources of legislation, and that as many laws of the country as possible are compliant with the Sharia and have backing from the different schools of Islamic law. And in many Muslim majority countries, like in Pakistan and Kuwait, there actually are bodies in Egypt, there are bodies whose job is to review the laws to make sure that the laws do not contradict the Sharia. So it's and Iran has the same thing. So it's a constant process. But that's very different than bringing back the office of the Khilafah.
in similar with Muslim unity, countries who work together don't have a Khalifa that brings them all together.
Yeah, the Mahdi will do that. That's the Mahdi's role. Very easily, he will do that. That's one of the signs of the Mahdi. Yeah.
Please elaborate on what you just said, the Caliphate question, having more laws than
The position of the Khilafah is a superior position than the head of a nation state. So in the books of Islamic law, it's called Imam al-Uzma, the greater imamate position. And when there's the Khalifa, there are certain things that are required because of the Khalifa, like the minting of money has to go a certain way, Jummah prayer has to be done in his name, he has to lead the Jummah prayer, so therefore the Khalifa can only be a man, not a woman, things like that. With the head of state, of a nation state, whatever that head of a state is, if it's a king, if it's a queen, if it's prime minister, if it's president, whatever, that's not the Khalifa. So those things are not necessary in an Islamic nation state. So a woman could be the head of an Islamic nation state, but not the Khilafah. So there are certain things in traditional classical fiqh that the office of the Khilafah necessitates certain things. But that object what we say mahall al-hukm, that object of the ruling has now been removed. It's like if somebody loses a limb, you don't make wudu on the limb above it. You lost the limb, you don't make wudu. So we lost the khalifa, so we don't have to do those things. Those things are suspended. A lot of them are ceremonial, yes, that's true. But, the Ottoman Empire was an empire. I mean, yes, it was on decline, but at one point in time it was a major international power player. And the assumption is that the office of the Khalifa would carry that type of power. That Khalifa then would officially represent Muslims on an international level. But we don't have that. No Muslim leader represents all of this. Even though every Muslim leader thinks they represent all of this, that's not the truth. So. Yeah. Global warming. I think so. I think it would be considered one of the medium signs. Allah Ta'ala says, ظَهَرَ الْفَسَادَ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ بِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِي النَّاسِ. That mischief has appeared on earth and on land by what humankind has wrought. So that fitna, that could be, we could say that that's one of the signs of Yawm al-Qiyamah. And there will be more natural disasters, as a matter of fact. I guess now we would say, reading those hadith, that's going to be a result of the climate change, but that there will be a massive earthquake in the east and the west. Now, where in the east and where in the west, is that California, along that fault line, and Japan, one being the further east and west. That we don't know with certainty, but it's going to be massive. It'll be like some massive tectonic activity where there's like a massive earthquake where a lot of people will perish. So whether it's like an earthquake / tsunami, so we could say that it's the global warming will lead and facilitate those natural things. And then with Ya'juj and Ma'juj, there's an interesting thing of how they end that also involves wind and rain. We'll talk about that. That doesn't mean that we should not fight global warming. We shouldn't be like, it's a sign, subhanAllah, it's supposed to be like that. Live your good life and plant the seed.
Does the hangback philosophy principle, how does that apply in our context? So I think some could interpret it as an apathy.
Yeah. No, it's not apathetic, because there's a lot of things that we should be doing that we're not doing. But hang back from those things that like that example that I gave. We have specific instructions not to do that. So hang back from that, but not hang back from making your country a better country and getting involved. No, not like that. Not just stay home and hang back. I'm just sort of over-exaggerating to make a point. No, we should not be apathetic, or we should not be passive, nor should we be pessimistic. We should be optimistic, and because the Prophet ﷺ, he said, the good will be in my ummah until the final hour. Even though the Prophet ﷺ also said that the hour will not come except when there is nobody left on earth that says the word Allah, Allah. But when you put those hadith together, the ulama say, it means that the Muslims will be very few, and then therefore inconsequential. But there will always be good in the community until the final hour, the Prophet ﷺ said. So if there's good, and we hope and pray that we are a manifestation of the good, we have work to do. So whatever work we can do, we should do. But in the areas in which the Prophet ﷺ don't play around with, that's the stuff that we can, that's what I'm saying, hang back. Kind of like joking. I don't think we should literally.
It's not like a creed, hang back.
No. I am lazy as Tarek, but that's personal. But please, do all the work, and I'll take all the credit. It's not our creed, but politically, there's a lot of hang back politically in those type of politics. That is true. So Muslims that get super excited about elections and revolution, I feel sorry for those people, because that is not the prophetic way at all. And that's if you think you're going to affect the American election, what are you smoking? That's my perspective. But if free to disagree and work. I'm not saying it's haram. But on the macro political stuff, yeah, there is a lot of like, it's always going to be bad at the top. And the person at the top or the people at the top are a reflection of society itself. So we should work on building the ground up. And honestly, on the politics things, I mean, you can only really play that game if you have power and money. So when you don't have power and money, you try to get involved, you end up becoming the pawn in someone else's game. That's I think what's difficult. So the people that want to do that, realistically, I'm being honest now. I think that those people really need to think about that. But that's not my area. That's not my forte. You guys were assuming it was going to be at Juge. I'm at Juge today. Nobody, nothing else? Well, I thought this was going to be much more difficult. You got an easy crowd, no.
So, you said music is like all kind of music is so what kind of like target policy?
Music, the ulama says like poetry or like anything else in the arts. The good of it is halal and the bad of it is haram. So if there's music that makes you do something haram, obviously that's going to be haram. Just like if you had a friend that made you do something bad, that's a bad friend. But if there's music that that has meaning, and if there's music that encourages you and things like that, that's good. Can you imagine people going into battle without music? You're going to tell the troops, oh, it's haram, you can't listen to music. And that's the only way that they can, get in the zone to do what they need to do. So music, instruments, that's not haram. There's nothing essential haram about musical instruments. String, wind, percussion, etc. There's nothing intrinsically haram about that. But how I use that can be haram or can be halal. The Muslims invented instruments, invented the oud, the qanun, all of these things. Al-Razi Al-Farabi wrote Kitab al-Musiqa al-Kabir, the big book of music, and he wrote about musical instruments, and he talked about the meter of music, and there's a relationship between the meter of music and the maqams of the Arabic poetry, and those maqams we use to recite the Quran. It's a very sophisticated thing, the arts. Of course it's not haram. Don't ask me about specific artists and stuff like that. I mean, that's subjective. You have to tell yourself if this is haram or this is halal. You know what I'm saying?
So for example,
Don't give me that look like you're like I said something wrong.
No, I was going to ask because
Say okay, I listen and I'll understand. Don't give me the you're trying.
No, I was trying to get it in my brain. So for example, if you listen to music in a different language, even though the poetry can be like bad prose, for example, in their language, but you don't understand it, but you listen to it. So you're not understanding it, but you're listening to it, and it's good. It's just a lot of haram.
If you keep asking, this is going to be like Bani Israel and the Baqarah. Don't keep asking. The Shaykh said music is halal. If it's good, yes, it's halal. Just leave it at that. Don't say, oh, what if I had a friend? And the friend, don't be like that. Don't be like that. The Prophet ﷺ did not like those type of questions. Khalas, just leave it as it is. It's like you go to your friend's house and he's Muslim and he gives you dinner. Don't ask him if the food is halal. If you thought the food was haram, you wouldn't have gone in the first place. Khalas, he's your Muslim neighbor. And he's haram, come on. Just leave it the way it is. Don't be like that. Inna Allah ya'murukum an tadhbahu baqara. Allah says, slaughter the calf. And they could have taken any calf and been done with it. What color is it? How old should it be? Al-Baqarah tashabahat alayna. They're just were confused. Tell us what to do. فَذَبَحُوهَا فَمَا كَادُوا يَفْعَلُونَ. So they slaughtered it and they almost weren't going to slaughter it. So we don't want to be like that. The whole surah is called Surah Al-Baqarah, even though the story is only like 4 or 5 verses in the Quran. The whole surah is called Surah Al-Baqarah. We don't want to be like that. That's why Allah gave us that story. If something is halal, khalas, it's halal. Maybe listening to Britney Spears motivates you and Shakira. Okay, man. That's what motivates you, that's what motivates. It doesn't motivate me. I like different kind of music. But I'm not going to say, oh, she is halal or she is haram. I had to drive to Indianapolis one night in Ramadan all night. I left after iftar and I arrived at Fajr. I listened to music. If I did not listen to music, I would have like died in a ditch somewhere. I mean, I had to stay awake. That was wajib for me. I'm not going to tell you what I listened to. Anybody else? Is it Isha time?